China's dangerous strategy in the East Sea, without a counterweight strong enough to make China cautious, ensuring stability and freedom of navigation, Beijing will gradually become a hegemon in the region later. When militarizing the East Sea, international scholars warn. Cabbage strategy. Speaking at the opening of the hearing before the United Nations Permanent Court of Arbitration in the Netherlands in July, Philippine Foreign Secretary Albert Del Rosario exposed the strategy of gnawing at the East Sea that Chinese officials are pursuing. To international observers, this strategy is also known as slicing the sausage, meaning taking small steps over a long period of time, without any step being so strong as to provoke a crisis. Panicked, Mr. Del Rosario was quoted by Philstar newspaper. But when all these small steps are combined, China's efforts to gradually consolidate control over the East Sea are clear. Chinese military officials still call this partial invasion plan the cabbage strategy, with the goal of being occupied like a cabbage, with each layer of leaves surrounding it gradually thickening, Mr. Del Rosario affirmed. According to scholar Peter Dutton, from the U.S. Naval War College, next time Beijing will continue with this strategy, by deploying coastal patrol forces as well as other paramilitary forces to the area surrounding rocks and artificial islands. This action will challenge all parties, including the U.S. military, to use force against Beijing's non-military forces. Nevertheless, those paramilitary forces will be protected by deterrent forces in the rear, including the Chinese Navy and anti-access/area denial, A2/AD, forces, or anti-intervention forces, which deploy the world's largest arsenal of ballistic and cruise missiles. According to Associate Professor Andrew S. Erickson, from the U.S. Naval War College, on a broader scale, China's artificial island building activities, increased presence in the East Sea and accompanying official statements of this country, is testament to international concerns that, once China feels strong enough, it will take more drastic and dangerous actions. Beijing could abandon its previous statements and actions of restraint, bully its smaller neighbors, openly or covertly threaten the use of force to resolve disputes, and seek change or ignore it. Ignore international rules. That is why the U.S. needs to adjust its thinking and policies to stabilize the situation and counterbalance the possibility of China's negative behavior and influence, Mr. Erickson affirmed in his testimony before the European Subcommittee, Asia and the Pacific, of the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee on July 27. The content of the speech was published in an article on July 28 in the National Interest. Thucydides Trap, and New Great Power Relations. Mr. Erickson said that with China's growing strength and the strength and determination of the United States, perhaps U.S. officials will have to accept a region with controlled but strategic confrontations and conflicts. This will include accepting the basic reality that the United States will not be able to push China out of its current occupied positions, nor will it accept that other parties' positions in control in the East Sea will be replaced. Change. The most important thing is that the U.S. must maintain peace and stability of the status quo in this important but vulnerable region. However, U.S. officials need to avoid accepting China's policy concepts or interpretations that make it appear that the U.S. is afraid of increased tensions. Because Chinese officials have long understood that words matter, Erickson affirmed, before pointing out two obscure but recently favored interpretations by Beijing, Thucydides Trap, and Thucydides Trap, and Thucydides Trap. New type of relationship between great powers. Thucydides Trap is the term used by Harvard Kennedy School professor Graham Allison to explain the possibility of conflict between a rising power and an existing power. The term is based on a famous statement by the historian and philosopher of ancient Athens Thucydides. It was the rise of Athens and the fear of it on the part of the Spartan warriors that made war inevitable. According to the diplomat, this term was once mentioned by Chinese President Xi Jinping with the assertion, "We need to work together to avoid the Thucydides trap, destructive tensions between a rising power and existing powers. Our purpose is to support a new model of relations between major countries." However, according to Mr. Erickson, even without being provoked by anyone else, China is putting pressure on the U.S. The idea of avoiding the Thucydides trap at all costs misapplies the lessons of history. It erroneously suggests that only by taking drastic measures can the United States and China avoid a devastating conflict between a rising power and an established power. Washington and Beijing certainly have conflicts, tensions, and are even likely to fall into some degree of crisis in the future. But having many great common interests, economic and many other interests, combined with mutual dependence on a dynamic international system and mutual deterrence, will help both avoid war. Therefore, U.S. lawmakers need to avoid recognizing false historical analogies that could lead to unrealistic expectations in Beijing, expert Erickson emphasized. Similarly, China's introduction of the so-called new type of great power relations only means to imply that the U.S. needs to respect China's core interests, including the East Sea, while do not force Beijing to take similar actions. Instead, the U.S. needs to actively and persistently promote its policies. In short, the U.S. and China can avoid war and both sides will find ways to avoid fighting each other. Instead, it is important to maintain strong deterrence during peacetime, as well as during any crisis. The U.S. needs to deter Beijing to give up trying to resolve maritime and island sovereignty disputes by force, or even the threat of using force. American weapons systems, effectively deployed, can continually remind the Chinese leadership that they cannot achieve their goals by using military or paramilitary force to capture additional structures and surrounding waters, or prevent U.S. forces from operating in adjacent international waters and airspace. China and its intention to bend international law. Also in the hearing on July 27, Mr. Erickson also mentioned a new dangerous move by China, which is the intention to bend international law, in order to interpret laws and standards in a favorable direction. For myself, I can attest from personal experience the extent to which China has built a new, sharp, and steadfast generation of maritime law experts who are dynamic on the international stage, the deputy professor said. Professor of the U.S. Naval War College said. He believes that China's concerted efforts over time could make a difference that he said would compromise the governing effectiveness of common maritime principles to the detriment of we. Therefore, U.S. lawmakers need to take many response measures, including ratifying the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, maintaining a comprehensive and capable force structure in the region, and maintaining a strong presence in the region. Reliable missiles to deal with China's ever-expanding arsenal.